In February, as you know, Trump floated a proposal to halve the US military spending alongside Russia
Hmm.
and China. So, to give context to this for our audience, in 2024, the US's official military budget was 886. I think you said
Yeah,
885, around that
yeah, about that. Yeah,
billion, the billion. Though, as we said, the real figure is estimated to be like it on a 1.4 trillion around that, around that.
yeah, around that.
Russia's military budget is 8.64 billion, and China's is at 224 billion. So that means that per capita, the US budget is 16 times more than China. Of course, as anti-war and anti-imperialists, we at Global Majority for Peace, we're strongly in favor of anything that could lead to peace. Obviously, we want peace. But the two key obstacles that we see with this proposal that Trump is making is firstly, as you've touched upon partially, I think, but obviously it's much more than that. The US economy is really largely built on the military industrial complex. I can think of just off the top of my head, like US major corporations like Google, Amazon, Tesla,
Mhm.
Microsoft, Apple. I mean, they're all connected to the war machine.
Right.
And we're not even talking about Lockheed Martin, Boeing, or like actual weapons manufacturers. And of course, secondly, there's very little trust at the moment that the US has an ability to actually keep their word on any sort of agreement. So can you sort of expand on the reality of Trump's ability to actually cut the military spending? I mean, he says a lot of things,
Yeah.
but what is the reality?
The reality is it would be getting a deal with, well, first of all, China, as of a couple of days ago, China said we're not interested in this, so China will be out. But China has been expanding their military, their budget's approaching probably $300 billion now. So even that level, the Americans are spending three times as much as the Chinese. And then, as you said, when you put it in per capita terms, it's dramatic. The Russians are spending, they'll be up to about $150 billion this year. They're another massive increase in their military budget because of the war in Ukraine. They're spending about a third of their federal budget on their military right now. So a deal with the Russians, easy to see. If you could get a peace in Ukraine, a settlement that ends the war, well, then Russia could essentially go back to its pre-war spending. They're essentially spending almost double now what they spent, say, in 2021. So for the Russians to go back to 2021 levels of spending, maybe a little higher, would not be too difficult because so much of their spending right now are the operational costs of the war in Ukraine. So you take that away and the Russian military spending can fall quite easily. So that's why I think it can be a lot easier. Say Trump is sincere about this. And again, you have no idea what this guy's talking about. I mean, who knows what he means by it? Certainly, we've seen nothing within the Department of Defense or the larger national security establishment in the United States that would hint at anything like this. There is a week or two ago, the Washington Post misreported a memo, an internal Department of Defense memo, where supposedly the Secretary of Defense was telling his service chiefs and secretaries that we have to cut defense budget by 8% every year for the next 5 years. No, that's not what it actually meant. He said we're going to realign 8% of our budget. So we're going to take money from these programs and send them to these programs. So there is no one in, as far as I can see, in the White House, in Trump's cabinet, in the politically appointed levels of the American government who is interested in cutting the U.S. military budget. Even those who, like a guy named Mike Domino, who wants to get the United States out of the Middle East. He is Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. And so his appointment there was quite startling and important. But his reason for getting out of the Middle East is to focus more on confronting China. So even those in this Trump government who have been in favor of ending the Ukraine war, oh, it's not because they want to see stability in Europe. It's not because they want to see the killing stopped. It's not because of the dangers of the escalation of the war. It's because they think it's better for the Americans to be supporting efforts against the Chinese and against the Russians. The $180 billion or so that Congress appropriated for the Ukraine war would be better off spent preparing to kill Chinese than to kill Russians. That's the mindset there. So within his own administration, I can't point to anybody and say, yeah, that guy is going to go to bat. That guy's a heavy hitter on this. That guy is very interested, or gal, is very interested in seeing something as Donald Trump suggested, a cut in half. And then now you get to the Congress, and I can't imagine at all that 2/3 of American senators, which is what would be required to sign a treaty like this with Russia, would vote to cut the defense budget by any amount, let alone by in half. So the fight that Donald Trump would have on this would be massive. The military industrial complex would, in all its adjacent organizations and allies and friends, so the banks, the fossil fuel companies, the media, they would fight this as if their existence was at stake, which essentially it would be. I mean, you have a cut like that, it would be deadly for many, 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 not just weapons companies, but other companies that live off of that $886 billion a year. By the budget that was passed by the House of Representatives the other day by the Republicans, by 2030, the budget for the U.S. military would be over $1 trillion. So they've already voted on FY 2025. So FY 30. So 4 budget cycles from now, you'll have an actual $1 trillion budget for the U.S. military. So you can see, even as Donald Trump is saying, we're going to cut the defense budget in half, his own party in the House of Representatives is saying, no, we're going to drive this thing through the $1 trillion ceiling within 4 years. It'd be very, very difficult for him to do it, to go against the people within his own, not within his own party, but within his own government, as well as the full force of the American military industrial complex. It's a Leviathan, and it has an inertia of its own. To pull it apart, incredibly, incredibly difficult. And, the realities of the imperial presidency are such that if he was to push on this, there's a very good chance that he would be removed from office. In one way, form, or another, he would be removed from office. And of course, John F. Kennedy being the prime example of that.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I imagine that Trump will be aware of that case as well.
Well, he's pledged he's going to release the records from that.
Yes.
So, yeah, so we'll see. We'll see what we get. I think most of us aren't too hopeful to see what comes out of this big release. They've already buried it. Rather than just releasing the documents, they've already buried it under a congressional committee that's being led by some junior member of Congress. I think she's in her second term, and it's the person they put in charge of it, right? So rather than putting some member of Congress in charge of it who's been there for 30 years. They put a very junior member in charge. So just seeing that, this thing is going to get buried. I don't really know who she is. She could be the greatest person you meet any day of the week, but that's not enough to go up against, again, this Leviathan.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about Trump is that